Hi everyone and welcome to this video. So for those who do not know me, my name is Elisa and I'm currently doing my master degree at the University of Zurich in geography. And I'm taking this course called Political Geography, and it is because of this course that I'm making this video. It is my first time experimenting with video essays, so I hope everything works out. The topic of the video is a science fiction book analysis through a postcolonial lens. Don't worry if you're not sure or do not know what postcolonial means. I will explain it in a minute or try to give a definition. And the book I have chosen for this analysis is The Left Hand of Darkness. And okay, so here I have the Italian version from the author Ursula K. Le Guin. Not sure that I'm pronouncing this correctly. Well, the book is from 1969 and I also have the English version here. After I started reading it, I noticed that there were some interesting takes on the topic of colonialism and also, of course, the topic of gender, which is the main thing about the book. And that's why I thought it would be interesting to analyze it. Now, as I promised, I'm going to try to give you a definition of postcolonialism so that we are clear to what I'm referring to. From the book Postcolonialism, An Historical Introduction by Robert J.C. Young, he defines the postcolonial as a dialectical concept that marks the broad historical facts of decolonization and the determined achievement of sovereignty, but also the realities of nations and peoples emerging into a new imperialistic context of economic and sometimes political domination. And again, in another book, Postcolonialism, a very short introduction, he states that since the early 1980s, postcolonialism has developed a body of writing that attempts to shift the dominant ways in which the relations between Western and non-Western people and their words are viewed. So, the postcolonial theory emerges as an analysis tool to critically discuss the cultural, political and economical legacy of Western colonialism. Now I will try to quickly, or not so quickly, summarize the book for you. So the premise of the book is that we are in the future where intergalactic travel is possible, so a very classical science fiction premise. And the main character is called Genly, and he's a man from Earth, and he's sent to this planet, to this frozen planet called Gethen or Winter, in order to convince the nations there to join the Ecumen. And the Ecumen is very central to the book, and it is an interstellar organization grounded by the wise Hainish, and so they will be kind of the original human species, but we're not going into details with it. The purpose of the Ecumen is to create a peaceful consortium of worlds, so they are really against violent colonial domination, and they are only there to coordinate communication, trade and cultural exchange between the worlds. And what is special about the planet Gethen is that the people there have no gender, they are ambisexual, and they will only develop a gender once a month for a few days for sexual reproduction, and this gender can change each time. And there are 4 nations on the planet, but only 2 nations are discussed in the book, and they are like the biggest ones. And we have Caridish, which is a pseudo-feudal nation with a king and lords, and it's not centralized at all, and it's made up of small villages. And then we have Orgorein, which is a centralized modern nation state, we could say. There has never been war on the planet Gethen, this is very important, but at the beginning of the book there are tension rising between the 2 main nations, and it is clearly stated that if Caridish would also become this centralized modern nation state that Orgorein is, then a war would be possible. So the book is told by Genly's first perspective at first, and then later also by the second main character perspective, so kind of a few chapters with Genly's perspective and few chapters with the other perspective. The main character starts his journey in the nation of Caridish, where he's trying to get a hearing with the king. He has been in Cardiff for quite some time when the book starts. He says, I think 2 years. And at the beginning, we're also introduced to the second main character, which is Estraven. So at this point, I have to make a quick digression on the pronoun question, because Estraven would be a genderless person, so it would make sense to call them they, but the author chooses to call them he. And she justifies the choice, saying that the book is told in Janley's perspective, and Janley is a man, and he can only see Estraven as a man. But then there is a bit of the problem that when the book is told by Estraven's perspective, they still gender themselves as he. Yeah, so end of the digression. So this Estraven is the king advisor, and they are the one who's helping Janley to learn the local costume and adapt to the planet. However, there are many misunderstandings between them and because of cultural differences, and Janley does not trust Estraven. The hearing with the king does not go as planned, and this leads to Estraven being banned from Cardiff and Janley leaving as well. So they will go into Orgorain separately, but they will meet again there, where Estraven will try to convince the Council of Orgorain to join the Ecumen. But this also does not go very well, and Janley is arrested by the secret police. Estraven comes to his rescue, and they try to return to Cardiff, going through a journey through a glacier. So I said Gethen is a frozen planet, so it's, a challenging journey. And they will come to Cardiff again, but Estraven is killed because he was banned from the planet. Nonetheless, Janley finally convinced the king to join the Ecumen, and then the other nations join as well. So, since I want to analyze a work of science fiction through a postcolonial lens, I first need to introduce you to the history of colonialism and science fiction, so how are the two related, and to the later emergence of postcolonial science fiction. For this section, I'm mainly referencing two introductions of two different books. The first one being Colonialism and the Emergence of Science Fiction by John Rieder, and the second one being Postcolonialism and Science Fiction by Jessica Langer. So, in his book, Rieder argues that science fiction is actually a direct product of European colonialism, as the period where the genre emerged was the late 19th century, and this coincides with the period of greatest imperialist expansion. As there were no places left on Earth for a radical exoticism of unexplored territory, the writers had to invent some other place, so this means other planets. Consequently, much of the early science fiction mirrors colonial ideologies, and there were some criticism of colonialism, but it was, more superficial. However, Jessica Langer argues that after the emergence of postcolonial theory, so in the 80s, postcolonial authors used the genre science fiction and its tropes to criticize colonialism. And they use these tropes of the alien and the faraway planet to criticize the ways in which Western scientific discourse and the discourse of scientific progress has interacted with colonialism. But as I said, this was much later because the genre emerged in the late 19th century, and this was only in the 80s. And going back to the book, The Left Hand of Darkness, now we can ask ourselves where could that be positioned? And well, the author Wendy Pearson, in her article Postcolonialism, Genders, Sexualities and the Legacy of the Hand of Darkness, she argues that even though postcolonial theory did not exist as a field of study at the time that Guin wrote her novel, the novel is still informed by the very conditions and historical circumstances that created both the post-colonial condition and the theory that attempts to explain and understand it. So this would suggest that the novel can be considered post-colonial in the sense that it has received the same influences that post-colonial theory received. So I will now like to discuss a bit the general discourse around the book. The central topic of the book, as I think it was clear also from the summary, is gender. And the author stated herself in many interviews that she wanted to question patriarchy, this binary of man and woman, of dominator and submissive. And the general discourse about the book, in fact, revolves around these topics as well. And there was, as I mentioned before with the pronouns, also a bit of controversy about it. But as I think I made clear to the topic of this video, is that I'm interested more in how the novel discusses colonialism and maybe less in the gender discourse, as it's something that has not been talked about that much. And I think it's relevant and there is a lot to interpret in the book. But of course, I cannot just ignore completely the gender discourse because it is very much interconnected with the colonial discourse in the book. There are only few articles that also explore, other than the gender discourse, also explore the colonial discourse. And these articles consider Guin's work as a precursor of postcolonial science fiction and a novel that links issues of gender and race to the history and legacy of colonialism. Quoting directly from the article by Mona Fayad, the process of colonizing the Athenians thus involved projecting onto the androgyne the same ecumen desire for power and knowledge represented as masculine, while at the same time alleging that he needs to submit to the superiority of the ecumen because he's tainted physically by a femininity that emasculates him. Actually, from this quote, to me there is something that does sound off, because if the ecumen is this anti-colonial, unproblematic institution, then how come does the author of this article talk about a process of colonization by the ecumen?
There were a lot of violent struggles about power and domination going on in the world, and so also in my novels. But I was more interested in exploring alternatives to violence and exploitation. And this is the basic purpose of the ecumen, a peaceful consortium of worlds. The ecumen was a device that let me send intelligent people all over the universe to find out interesting things.
So, the premise of the ecumen is that it has been ideated as this opposite of a colonial power, and Wendy Pearson states that the postcolonial or anti-colonial nature of the work resides in Jen Lee's role as the ecumen's envoy, sent alone into a strange new world precisely in order to avoid the dangers of colonization. In fact, later in the novel, Jen Lee realizes his own role, that he has been sent alone in order to avoid the rhetoric us versus them, in order to be able to assimilate the culture without disrupting it. So it might seem that the Left Hand of Darkness depicts an institution that is fully anti-colonial and that does not want to establish asymmetric power relations, right? And as Le Guin says herself in the interview, she wanted to build an escape from this world, a world with a lot of violent struggles about power and domination. But in the novel, I quickly realized that there were a lot of contradictions within the ecumen, and that Jen Lee as the envoy is far from a perfect neutral observer. In fact, Jen Lee praises the more industrialized and centralized Orgorein for being modern and ready to enter the ecumen, unlike this pseudo-feudal Caridish. He will later change his mind when the secret police arrest him, but yeah. He also explains that he's not selling progress to the indigenous, and that to join the ecumen it is necessary to meet as equals with some mutual understanding and candor. And I think this shows that, of course, on one side the ecumen is trying to avoid mistakes of the past and is trying not to establish a relation of dominator and submissive with its new members. However, in my opinion, it is also implying that the ecumen bases itself on a Western idea of progress, because Jen Lee describes Orgorein as ready because it will be placed at a later stage of development than Caridish if we take the Western history as reference. And to meet as equals is implying to meet with certain ideas of what progress is and which direction would be forward. The whole idea of the ecumen is to gain material profit, increase knowledge, the augmentation of the complexity and intensity of the field of intelligent life, the enrichment of harmony, and the greater glory of God, curiosity, adventure, delight. So these are the promises of the ecumen, and the ecumen can then only be joined if a planet shares these ideas of how the complexity of life can be augmented. And this whole purpose of the ecumen can become a double-edged sword if it means that what is outside the ecumen has less knowledge and therefore has less value. And even if the ecumen has sent only one person trying to avoid the dangers of colonization, this person still has a considerable impact on Gethen. In fact, it is through Genly that Gethenians learned that they are the only word without gender, and that other words exist with more complex technologies, which is something they should also strive to. And since they are the only word without gender, it means that they are positioned as the exception from the norm. So this relegates Gethen to the margins, implying therefore that the ecumen is at the center. And although the ecumen is of course not remotely as predatory as the colonial powers of our world's past, if we look at it from a postcolonial perspective, we can notice that it's still built on the same exact ideas of progress and evolution that were used to justify colonialism in the first place. In conclusion, I do not know whether Guin wanted the ecumen to be an fully unproblematic anti-colonial institutions and the colonial narratives were put there unintentionally, or whether she purposely wanted to criticize seemingly peaceful international institutions for their still colonial rhetorics. What we do have is the interview where she mentions that she created the ecumen in opposition to the violence that was going on in the world. And I also found an interview from 2015 where she heavily criticized the Western idea of progress. But of course, this interview is much more recent, and she could have changed her mind in the meantime about the ecumen. We don't know. I will leave you with an extract of the interview, and thanks for watching this video, and bye.
What do you mean progress? Progress, I think we sort of assume that it means progress towards something better, higher, nobler, more generous, more free. I don't know, but you can progress towards evil just as easy. Mm-hmm. We don't, you know, maybe I'm playing with words here, but I'm a little bit worried about this idea that, you know, we have to just, if we have progress, we'll be okay. I have to say that this sort of the dominant European white imperial voice has got us where we are, and it's not a very good place to be right now.